I don't know if that's clear, but don't use a ruler to be anal. Are you sure I never showed you how to roll paper beads? I'm not sure about where you are, but the weather in my little portion of the world is slightly inclement and iffy lately, which makes for the perfect setting to stay indoors and get creative. So let's do that. My name is Renee, and welcome back to my channel. I'm popping up here with a quick video to introduce my basic paper bead rolling technique. This has been a topic I've been trying to get around to. I've had a few people inquire about it on my channel. There's just so many topics to cover. I am excited, as with everything else I do on this channel, to share this technique with you. Today I'm keeping it very simple and I'm going to get into more complicated techniques in future videos. There is a playlist that I've started for this topic, so I hope you will check that out and watch for the upcoming videos on the same playlist and the same topic. Without further ado, let's get started. Fortunately, getting started with rolling paper beads does not require an extensive list of material. To begin, you'll of course need salvage paper. There are many different types of paper that you can use, and hopefully once you've learned this technique, you will feel comfortable trying different papers. Many years ago when I learned this technique, I learned it using magazine pages. But for the sake of clarity and in the hopes that you'll be able to see everything I'm doing easier, for this demo, I'll be using salvage white book pages. You'll also need glue sticks. This can be any brand, including the cheap ones, but it does need to be glue sticks because it needs to be that particular type of soft, flexible glue. To roll your beads, you will need square toothpicks. You are, of course, welcome to try the round. For some strange, unknown reason, it's easier for me to remove my roll beads from the square toothpicks than the round. Just trying to save you some trial and error there. Next on your list of provisions is something I hope you already have on hand: scissors. I have a pair that I dedicate only to paper cutting because I want them to stay nice and sharp and clean. Last but not least, pencils and a ruler. I will note that I use pen for magazine pages because it marks easier on the glossy paper. Okay, humor me for a moment while I break down how this is going to work. Before we roll a single bead, we are going to be folding the paper several times. My technique is the same no matter what size paper I'm using. It's not unlike how you might have made snowflakes in elementary school, folding the paper several times over prior to cutting out your snowflakes. The end goal with my technique is a series of long skinny triangles in different widths. The bottom width of the strips are what determine the widths of your beads. You could absolutely freehand with some paper, just cut some strips of paper freehand, skipping the measuring and line drawing steps to go straight to cutting those paper strips freehand. I personally prefer creating those guidelines to help me get nice, uniform shaped paper beads. If you'd like to see some of my finished project using my paper beads, stick around for the little reel at the end of this video. And now let's fold. I only ever fold the paper over 2 times because more than that would be harder to fold and of course harder to cut. We're looking to make the process easy. You could totally use a fancy bone folder if you have that on hand, or even a ruler. I'm just using my fingernail to make nice crisp folds. Now that I have several pages folded, I'm going to grab my ruler and start drawing lines. As I mentioned before, my technique is exactly the same for other papers such as magazine pages and other size papers. The first thing we're going to do with our folded pieces of paper is to mark along the bottoms of the strips. Again, the marks along the bottoms are the widths of your finished beads, so keep that in mind. My folded pages tend to fall around 1.5 inches wide. And since I vary the size of my beads, sometimes it'll be 3 half-inch wide beads, sometimes it'll be a bunch of 1/4 inch wide beads. It just varies. It's not meant to be complicated. There is no mathematical formula, and I practically do different widths on every single piece of folded paper I mark. So it's just whatever you want them to be. If you want wider beads, you cut wider widths. Don't use a ruler to be anal. That doesn't sound good. Don't use a ruler to be too picky, okay? That's not what it's there for. It's just there for a loose guide, you know? And so because I'm going for triangle-shaped strips, I'm going to mark along the bottom, and on the top, I'm going to mark the midpoint of each of those marks at the bottom. That way, when I use my ruler to connect the points from the top to the bottom, I get a series of long, skinny triangles that roll up into beads of varying roundness depending on the length of your paper that get fatter in the middle. The beauty of doing it this way is that as you draw and cut your paper strips, you are going to also get strips from the leftovers that come from cutting out your measured strips. You may have noticed that I turned the paper around to draw the final line, and that's because for me it's easier to do it that way on the open end. I don't know if that's clear, but yeah. Here I'm making marks at narrower intervals to make smaller beads. Since I made the width of these beads 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to mark the midpoints at the top at 1/8 of an inch. Also, I want to note that I often do various size beads on the same piece of paper. They don't all have to be the same size for this to work. I'm hoping I'm making that clear. I'm hoping that makes sense. Here's a little tip I meant to share earlier, but now is better than ever, right? When I fold my pieces of paper, I try to fold the side that looks best to me inside. So when I'm rolling, the sides that have the lines on them are my insides. They're the less attractive side. They're the side that I want to roll on the inside. Paying attention to this detail will keep your prettiest colors on the outside when you're rolling magazine or catalog pages, and will keep your lines on the inside so you don't have to see them on your edges of your beads. Now that I've done several pieces of paper, that will give me a good quantity of beads. I will start cutting. You can just do one piece of paper if you like. I like to do several, so I have a nice pile of paper strips ready to roll. To roll my paper beads, I start with the widest end, of course, and I get my toothpick and I just start to roll the bead around the toothpick. But there's a catch. Before you roll the paper onto the toothpick, you need to slide it across your glue stick. This is a technique that I've developed for my own convenience. I'm not sure how anybody else does it. I'm guilty of not taking the time to look at other people's techniques or tutorials over the years, which probably would have helped me, but here we are. Here's another tip. So your bead doesn't stick permanently to the toothpick, try not to start the strip at the very top. Let's call it the finger margin. Start adding glue a little below the top of the strip so that the paper is somewhat dry at the top and does not stick to your toothpick when you start to roll it on there. Earlier I said that I'm not sure why it's easier for me to remove the beads from a square toothpick than from a round toothpick, and that's not totally accurate. Well, I gave it some thought, and the reason is that when I roll beads, I roll them relatively tightly, and on a round toothpick, it's easier to roll them pretty tight. Look, I'm the girl who has the tension too high on the sewing machine, so if you roll things or tie things tightly like I tend to do, you might want to have the square toothpicks so they prevent you from tightening things too tight and you can get your beads off easier. Let me know in the comments, is my way of explaining this convoluted or is it making sense to you? Now, as you get comfortable rolling these beads like this, it will come easier. So just give yourself time. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's a very easy technique once you get it. As you may have noticed, I went back and added a little bit more glue to the end of my bead, and then after I finished rolling it, I spun the bead around to coat it with a little bit more glue to make sure it doesn't unravel. And now I'm popping it off the toothpick, and there you have it. My bare bones basic bead rolling technique. Here are some examples of beads of different widths created from the paper strips. I'm going to insert a link to a short where I demonstrate how to make these beads different shapes. And then in future videos, I'll be sharing how to make fatter, bigger beads as well. And here's another tip. If you're using standard square toothpicks like I am, your bead holes will be approximately 2 millimeters in diameter. If, however, you need your bead holes to be a little bit larger, you can easily use bead rimming tools to enlarge the holes of your paper beads. I'll add comparable rimming tools to my Amazon storefront, along with a few other tools that might come in handy for paper bead making. To seal my paper beads, I simply pop them onto bamboo skewers and apply whatever gloss sealant I have on hand, or you could always use matte if you prefer. I'll be sure to add some of my favorites to my Amazon storefront for your convenience. Please be sure to stick your questions in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. You can ask questions in the comments. What can I say?